Hello, welcome. I'm Penny Thornton and I'm talking astrology. And on this video, I'm talking specifically about the solar eclipse in Gemini on the 10th of June, 2021. And of course, as always, I'm going to be looking at the setting in which that solar eclipse is taking place, because there are an awful lot of other important alignments happening at roughly the same time, which makes it a really, really important period. In fact, we're in this kind of season of eclipses, which began on the 20th of May as the sun entered the sign of Gemini. And this whole period, right through to the 21st of June, when the sun enters the sign of Cancer, and the day after Mercury turns direct, we could look at this whole time period as being one of the most important of the year. All sorts of things going on for us individually, and of course for the planet as a whole. I want to talk first of all about the solar eclipse in its reality. This is known as an annular eclipse. And this means that from the perspective of us on Earth, the moon is smaller than the sun. And so what happens when the two come together, they conjoin, they become a conjunction, is that the moon doesn't really completely cover the surface of the sun. And it leaves a little halo or aureola or ring of fire, as it's often called. And that's quite a spectacular sight, as you can see. This is what that ring of fire looks like if you can see that particular annular eclipse. Now, for the most of us who can see this eclipse, it won't appear like that. It's only going to look like that for northern latitudes. For the rest of us, it's going to look a little bit like this. It looks like a round cheese with a bit taken out of it. And that has everything to do with where we are positioned on the Earth. If you are actually in the very northern tip of Canada, northern part of Norway and Sweden, Greenland, right through into Siberia, you should be able to see a ring of fire, which will be very exciting. But if you're in North America, the UK, most of Europe, stretching along that way, then we'll probably get the moon with a slice taken out of it. It's always very dangerous to look at an eclipse. You need special glasses or a special lens in a camera to look at it. But I did read somewhere that you might be able to get a colander and look through a colander, because that will, show a refraction. You won't be able. You're not looking directly at the sun at all. So that's the kind of astronomics of the piece. In a moment, we'll come and look at what it means in interpretation and a few other things besides. But what I want to come to now is the setting in which that eclipse is taking place. What other very important alignments are going on? And if we look at the chart now, we can see the eclipse. This is the chart of the eclipse. And in fact, I've set this eclipse chart for Churchinese, which is a little place north, in the very north of Norway, it well into the Arctic Circle, which actually I've been to lovely Churchinese, and it was a very special experience. But yes, if you live around that neck of the woods, then you're going to see the ring of fire. But if you look at the sun and moon there at the sort of 1 o'clock position of the chart, you'll see the sun which is a circle and a dot, and the moon, which looks like a moon. I've drawn a line from that conjunction or that solar eclipse through to another planet, which is sort of in the 3 o'clock position of the chart. That's the planet Neptune, and it looks like a trident. And I'm going to be talking about that shortly, because what it means is that at the time of the eclipse, it's taking place in square or at a very dynamic and powerful angle to the planet Neptune. So I'm going to be talking about that in a minute. I'm going to also be talking shortly about that other red line you can see between the television aerial, which is Uranus, and the planet Saturn, to which it is aligned, or there's a line drawn from that to Saturn, because what is going to happen on the 14th of June is that Saturn and Uranus are again going to be in square with each other, but this time Saturn is in retrograde. So just a brief word about something else before I come to that, and that is the position of the planet Mars. You can see that in the 11 o'clock position on the horoscopic circle, looks like the planet Mars. And there you will see a degree number. It says 29 degrees and 18 minutes of Cancer. So it's coming to the end of its transit of that sign, and it's going to head into Leo a couple of days later. But the thing is, while Mars is in Cancer, and it will be during the time, the run up to the eclipse and a couple of days after, this is really affecting the cardinal signs. That means Cancer, Capricorn, Aries, and Libra. And I did talk about that on my last video, because what it means is that it's very agitating for these four signs. Mars is in one of the dynamic areas of the horoscope, and it gets you moving and motoring. It gets you very antsy. It gets you much more aggressive. It gets you very driven because you want to accomplish more. But also a lot of arguments break out and a lot of conflict breaks out. That's why it can be a difficult transit for the cardinal signs. But, let's look at it another way and see that we can stand our ground on a Mars transit. We can get things done, which is really important. And sometimes, we do need to bring things to a head. And I'm looking particularly at the 5th of June and that Mars-Pluto opposition for really confronting the elephant in the living room, you four signs, and really standing your ground, confronting it, getting rid of it, done and dusted, clear the air, and move on. But it is a very confrontational time for the planet. You might like to keep your eyes open for that. So on to that Saturn-Uranus square. And that is particularly present for the signs of Leo and Aquarius and Taurus and Scorpio, especially if you're born around the 3rd of February, the 3rd of May, the 3rd of August, and the 3rd of November. Now, the principle of the Saturn-Uranus square is a very interesting one, and I have talked about it before, but I'm going to look at it in a slightly different way this time. And I'm going to take one of the key words for Saturn that we don't always use so often, and that is responsibility. If we look at Saturn representing responsibility, and we look at Uranus for representing awakening and triggering events that trigger the process of responsibility, we can really, really see this taking place right now. And as I'm speaking to you, the news that has just really been dominating world headlines in many ways, aside from the Palestine-Israeli conflict, is the fact that back in 1995, Princess Diana gave an interview on BBC television, Panorama, in which she talked about everything. She told us everything about her life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the journalist who interviewed her for that, who set up the interview, Martin Bashir, is now in the center of a storm because he, in fact, along the way to obtaining that interview, he made some documents, had some fake documents made, fake bank statements. And although they were never actually used, to get the interview with Diana, it was still a wrong thing to do. And unfortunately, the BBC covered it up in a way, or they didn't really investigate it thoroughly. So here we are 25, 24 years later, however long it is, and accountability is needed. There is a triggering effect, not only for Martin Bashir, who must bear the responsibility on his shoulders, but also the BBC, who must take responsibility, take accountability for the cover-up that followed it. So you can see where I'm going with the Saturn-Uranus dynamic. I mean, particularly for the signs I've mentioned, but in a way for all of us as well, is that we have to take accountability for our past actions. A very good time to fess up and deal with it and say, I was wrong, or I did wrong, or that needs setting right. It's not really like the 12-step program where we have to knock on everybody's door who we've really hurt or damaged or whatever. Maybe not quite as extreme as that, but we do maybe need to talk to somebody about something that happened a while ago and apologize or take accountability for it. And also because this action is present now, and there'll be a Saturn-Uranus conjunction, about 10 years' time or whenever that happens. And that means that what we put in motion now, remember, Saturn is the planet of time, and all things come together in time. Actions have consequences. What goes around comes around. That's what we're always dealing with Saturn. And it means right now, your actions have to be true. Because you will have to take accountability for those actions next time around. So it is worth looking at that in both ways. And for all of us, I mean, yes, I've singled out the signs, the fixed signs, Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, and Scorpio, because they're in the front line of this process. But also, I think with Saturn and Uranus, we're looking at moving away from old patterns, which is good, and embracing new ways forward. And I think it's a very positive way of looking at the Saturn-Uranus square. And it's the same with looking at things that have done their day, whether they're gadgets and gizmos and technology and cars and whatever we may be looking at. They've done their day. It's time to get a new one. So we can look at it in very practical terms as well. But I think also, using it in the present time and applying it to what's going on, what we get on our news feeds and on our news programs, we're seeing so much of this kind of Saturn-Uranus interplay. The other thing I want to mention, which is interesting, one of the resonances that seems to occur with any Saturn-Uranus combination, that means the conjunction, the opposition, the square, and the inconjunct actually too, is that it has a kind of effect, or what we notice the presence of these planets in some kind of connection when there's a nuclear incident, and that can be on the good side, perhaps the development of some new nuclear power or something new breakthrough. But we could also look at it when accidents happen. And I think what's very interesting is that back in 2011, I can't remember the date, I think it was March the 11th, maybe 2011, when there was a huge earthquake off the coast of Japan, and that really affected the Fukushima nuclear facility. And it was followed by a tsunami, which then flooded the nuclear facility. Thousands and thousands of people died. It was a terrible event. But why I'm mentioning that is that now on the Saturn-Uranus square, quite recently, the Japanese government announced plans to take the water that's been lying around in that nuclear facility for 10 years, and we're looking at radioactive water and actually, pouring it out into the Pacific Ocean. So you see how there are resonances when we're looking at planets and, how they come back, with some kind of resonance. So yes, let me move on now. We've dealt with these two groups, the cardinal signs, we've dealt with the fixed signs, and now we need to come really to the mutable signs. We're going to be looking at Gemini, Sagittarius, Pisces or Virgo, because you are in the front line of the effects of this eclipse in terms of what happens in your life. But let me talk generally about this eclipse cycle, because it is an eclipse cycle. We have a little season of eclipses going on, because on the 26th of May, we had a total lunar eclipse, and now on the 10th of June, we're going to have a solar eclipse. So that's part of a little sequence. And when we get to December of this year, December the 4th, there'll be another solar eclipse, this time in Sagittarius. So this is a little cycle all in itself. And so sometimes there are connecting incidents that you might want to think about in terms of your own life, the events around the times of the eclipses, and also to look out on the world stage, the national and international stage, and see what resonances there are between these eclipses, the events at the time of the eclipses. But looking at the idea of a cycle of eclipses, there's an even bigger cycle going on, and that's called the Saros Cycle. Now, you can think of these as a kind of family of eclipses, And I don't want to get too technical about it, but this particular Saros cycle, it has little families of eclipses that all have a relationship with one another. And they start off as there's a little beginning, terribly tiny little partial eclipse going on, which means it's far away as it can be from the nodal axis, although still within range. And so every time it gets a bit nearer, coming to that central position of the nodal axis and then moving on out the other side, could take a long period of time. And I think in this case, and I get my years right, I think we might be looking at 1624 for when this particular Saros cycle started. And I think it ends in 2093. Now, you can go and check me out on this because I could be a little vague. Remember, I'm not reading an idiot board here. The only idiot board is in my head. So occasionally I can make a mistake on dates, but it's around that period. And, sometimes, it can be 1,000 years long, one of these Saros cycles. But there is another thing that I like to look at, and I think that may have just a little bit more relevance, although, maybe I should say one other thing about this particular Saros cycle. Bernadette Brady, an astrologer, wrote a book called The Eagle and the Lark, which if you're interested in forecasting and especially in the eclipse cycles, you'll want to get. And when she looked at this particular Saros cycle, she associated it with, in her research, with prophetic dreams, with visions, with psychic experiences, that kind of thing. So that might be something you might like to check out yourselves right now. And of course, what's very interesting in the light of this, if you go back to my Friday Bite of the 21st of May, which is on my website, astrolutely.com, you'll see that I talked about my own prophetic dream, which I had in 1989 about the death of Princess Diana. So in a way, I'm in the season of eclipses, which has a resonance with dreams, prophetic dreams, visions, all those kind of things. And I managed to plug into that in some way and talk about it in an article that I wrote. But the other thing that I think might have a little bit more relevance to us, something that we can really perhaps look at, is that in May of 2020, last year, the North Node entered the sign of Gemini. And it will move through the sign of Gemini through until about the January of 2022. And that means that all the eclipses that take place are either in Gemini or the opposite sign of Sagittarius. They're playing on that axis. Now, in astrology, when we look at the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, we're looking at things to do with communication, to do with travel, and to do with the higher mind, in the case of Sagittarius. And I can't really say the lower mind if we're looking at the Gemini side of things. But if you were to think about Sagittarius in terms of big pictures, great poetic, novelistic sweeps of language, when we come to Gemini, we're looking at facts and figures and a more journalistic kind of view. This is strictly in terms of writing and talking, of course. So when we think about this particular eclipse pattern happening on the Sagittarius Gemini axis, we've had so much going on with the travel industry. Look at what's happened to the poor travel industry. No planes or only a few planes flying, and even things like buses and trains, have all suffered. And we ourselves have found it very difficult to communicate. We've had to start virtually communicating with people. So we can see the effects of this eclipse cycle going from the Gemini Sagittarius on that axis. Really, we can see it so noticeably in terms of the effect that it had on our lives. And let's not exclude from this the idea of education. How many young people have had their education interfered with, or they've had to find new ways to be educated. And although in many ways this will give rise to some very good new ways of education, new ways of travel, new ways of communicating, new kind of horizons, our horizons opening in so many ways. And remember, we've also had space vehicles landing on planet Mars, and that's going to open up, a new planetary horizon for us. So we can really see the effects of that Gemini Sagittarius axis in terms of the very fateful developments that happen, or the extraordinary strides taken on that particular eclipse cycle. Now, in point of fact, because it takes 18 years for the North Node to come back to Gemini, we want to look at that period 2002, 2003, which was the last time the North Node was in Gemini. And most specifically, on June the 10th in 2002, there was an eclipse in exactly the same place. So if you can go back in time and think about that date, and of course, if it was your birthday, you're going to remember it, you're going to have a think back and think what was significant around that time. There is a connection between these two time periods. And yet another one in 2003, this time May the 31st, 2003, which is part of this particular Saros cycle. Again, they're linked. The events, the developments, the relationship, the resonances are coming from that period of time. So in terms of signs, obviously that eclipse, it can affect us all. And if you know your natal chart, and you have something at 19 degrees of the mutable signs, or around that time, we would be looking at, anywhere between about 15 to 23 of the mutable signs, then that eclipse will affect you. But specifically for Geminis, of course, it's in your sign. So that means all the principles of new beginnings are happening right in your personal life, right to you personally. And, however that comes in, whether that new beginning comes in by a fabulous, unexpected, good fortune, a piece of good fortune, or whether it comes about by quite the reverse, that new beginning is profound. It sets you on a whole new trajectory. You're not going on the same direction. If we come to Sagittarius, this solar eclipse, this new moon eclipse, is taking place in the area of relationships. So for you, a new beginning, some new developments, some unaccountable developments happening in the realm of partnerships. If we come to Virgo, we're looking at the 10th house. So here for you, it's about, where am I going in life? What are my aims? What big plans do I have for myself? What are my priorities? What's going on in my material world? What must I build to support myself? So the idea of a solar eclipse occurring here is something new. Is it a new job? Is it a new opportunity? Is it something happening that sets you on a new track? That solar eclipse is going to play a part in the story. For Pisceans, we're on the opposite end of that. We're in the 4th house. So we're with family. We're on home turf. And it means new beginnings there, maybe new life, new people coming into the family, but unexpectedly. I don't expect that. And the same with changes going on in the home. Is that because, you discovered that a wall was crumbling and you needed to get it, knock it down and get it rebuilt? Or is it that you decide we need a new outlook, the family? I need to really get a new perspective on who I am, where I've come from, all of that. And so I need to take steps to bring that about, even if that means I have to move house. Those are the themes we're sort of looking at. But I did say earlier on, when we were looking at the chart of the solar eclipse, that solar eclipse is in square to Neptune. Now, Neptune is this divine principle. We get all our most ecstatic moments in a way from Neptune. And remember Bernadette Brady talking about dreams, prophetic dreams and visions. My goodness, that's Neptune too. So is this a time when we glimpse the future, maybe personally in a dream or in a moment of great insight? But Neptune, of course, is also deceptive. And we're looking a little bit at this, with the Martin Bashir story, deception coming to light, deviousness. And we must also be aware of that happening at the moment. So whether we're looking at what's going on in our real lives? I mean, is someone deceiving us right now? Are we not seeing the full picture? Are we actually being betrayed or let down in some way? And in the bigger picture, we look at the world, what great missteps are being taken right now? What lies and half-truths and conspiracies are being spread? So these are the things we need to watch. And remember, with any eclipse, it's what's in the shadow of the eclipse. So it means either what's being brought out in this cycle of eclipses that's been in shadow, so we're seeing something we didn't know about, but also in the events that we're looking at, the events taking place in our own lives, out there on the world stage, what's being hidden? What can't we see that's going to come to light later and change the picture of what we see? Which brings me to my conclusion. And it's interesting, it was another thing that came out as I was writing my Friday Bite this week, this idea of fate and free will. Because I was looking at it in the context of my own dream, two dreams actually of Diana's death, which occurred in 1989, which was some 8 years before her death in the Alma Tunnel. And they're quite graphic. And it sort of says, well, that must mean that that event is indelible. It cannot be changed. If that is the case, that fate already has that in store. And it makes you think. My own take on this is that there is a divine plan, fate, call it what you like, but it's a little tiny bit elastic, a little bit loose, because it gives us the opportunity at certain moments to make a choice. And when we make a choice, we subtly affect that blueprint. And I want to talk about something that I also, well, as I'm recording it, this occurred to me today. I had a message from one of my clients. Well, not a one-on-one client, but someone who'd written to me in the past. She told me a very tragic story that she'd been involved in a car crash a week ago, just before the lunar eclipse, total lunar eclipse. A deer had sprung out of the out of the woods and hit the windscreen of the car. And that does happen a lot in the country, but unfortunately in this occasion, it caused cars to swerve and they all went into each other. It was a terrifying accident. And in that accident, her sister was killed, although she herself wasn't. And, she made a choice at that point in time not to collapse and go to pieces. She summoned up all her focus and determination, bravery and heart, and went to her sister's rescue and gave her mouth to mouth, the heart movements until the medical services arrived. And although her sister died in the accident, that kept her heart alive and fed her organs, and 4 of her organs were able to go to other people and saved their lives. And I think we can't do anything. She couldn't do anything about that accident. Maybe that accident was part of fate, if you like. But her actions in the wake of it were noble and brave and saved other people's lives. And that's what I mean about free will. So perhaps I didn't mean to end on such a profound note, but it's happening to us all around and about us all the time. The dynamics between things that happen to us, which we feel we have no control over, and those things that we know full well we make a decision. And that brings me back to the Saturn-Uranus square, taking accountability for our current actions, which will surely come back to haunt us in the future. So take care, everybody. Thank you for watching. And I look forward to being here again in a couple of weeks' time. Bye for now.